पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौः शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तरदिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिराप शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौः शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Sarvastaratu durgani sarvo bhadrani pashyatu. Sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Shanti Shanti Shanti. Asato ma Satgamaya Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we'll continue with the study of the Sutra number 5 on page 43. Let's read the Sutra again. Yat prapya na kinchit vanchati na shochati na dveshti na ramate notsahi bhavati. After obtaining which devotion, the devotee does not desire anything else, does not grieve, does not hate anything, does not enjoy anything else, and does not feel encouraged to do anything else. So we have been discussing up to this point a lot on this portion, does not hate anything. And we saw at the root of that hatred in our heart is this kind of disintegration that has happened in our psyche, in our mind. In psychology, oftentimes they use the word disintegration. In sociology, they call it alienation. But the basic idea is same, that which was whole has somehow gotten separated. And we saw psychologically how the separation, the mind has gotten divided into the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. We saw the separation of the mind from the inner self, and then the separation of the inner self from the Supreme Self. Now, all these are very subtle that are happening within. There is also one more kind of alienation, which is good for us to know, because that also is at the root of a lot of hatred that is present in the hearts of people. And that is the alienation with things which are outside of us, not simply within the mind. So this is a little bit, there is an external component to it. Hegel, that great philosopher, once said, it was one of his observations, that all human activities alienate us from God. And it was this idea of his that was taken by Karl Marx, and which then he applied it primarily in the economic sense, speaking about the separation of the worker from the work that is done. And we can understand it in the sense of, since we have been speaking about the role of the mind, the separation of the ego from the products. Because every work that we do there is ego involved in it, that I'm the one who is doing work. And every work, there is some product that we see, generally outside. Sometimes it's visible, sometimes it can be subtle, but there is a work involves some creation of something. In fact, work can be a very creative activity. But a lot of times, in the kind of times in which we live especially, the products of our work are no longer an expression of our own creativity. So let me say a little bit about creativity. Creativity, it's helpful to understand creativity as this basic urge in every living being to produce something new, so create something new. And at the most basic level, at physical level, this creativity just takes the form of the sexual activity in which a new life comes into being. So that is a kind of creativity, and the creativity that is experienced by living beings is a kind of inherited from this divine act of creation. In fact, in the Vedas, it says primarily once that one divine being suddenly thought, let me become many. So it's the journey from the one to the many is really an act of creation. If God alone existed and from God everything has come, so creation always means a movement from the one to the many. So there is an artist, a painter, let's say, and a painter does a lot of painting. So there was this one painter, and then there is all these many paintings. So it's always an act of creating, producing something. And we know that when you have, as a result of the work, you have produced something, even if it's like going out into the garden and working hard, then when you see the flowers and plants coming up, there is that inner sense of fulfillment, satisfaction, that your work has created something which there is that satisfaction involved. Now, that satisfaction may not come always. And the classical example oftentimes when we talk about this is given in the assembly line workers, especially in the early decades of the last century. Let's say when the auto industry was just had just begun and was thriving. And so you had the chassis moving along the line, and there will be this hundreds and thousands of workers working there. And all that they did, where they worked for 8 hours or 10 hours in a day, was just standing and just one little thing. As the chassis come, maybe just hold one part and just kind of fix it, and then it moves on. So for next 8 or 10 hours, all that this person did was fixing something. And afterwards, when the car rolled out, at the end of it, probably this worker couldn't even afford to buy the car. So the car was bought by people who could afford it. All that this person got was salary, was paid for the job that was done. Now, clearly, there is some satisfaction in working hard and being paid for your work. No denying that. But being paid for your work is one thing, but the work itself, while I might enjoy getting the salary at the end of the week or at the end of the month, am I getting satisfaction from the work itself? And that is a very serious problem. I forget the name of the author. There was one book several years ago called, I think it was titled The Greening of America. And the author says that the majority of people in this country, speaking about the American society, dislike their work. And oftentimes we hear the phrase job dissatisfaction. So it's a good question to ask, not only in our own heart, but just even among the groups in which we move, our friends or our family. How many are truly content with the kind of work they have to do? By content, sometimes I don't mean to say that, well, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't strive for anything better or higher. That doesn't mean you have to be bereft of ambition. I'm not suggesting that. It's fine to be always striving for better and higher and more opportunity. That's great. But what opportunity I have now, how happy I am with it. And so that's a problem, the separation. Because yes, I'm getting paid for my work, but nevertheless, if I'm spending, say, 8 hours of my day doing my work, that's 1/3 of a day. That's 1/3 of my life, my working life. And if 1/3 of my life I'm doing something which is not particularly satisfying, then there is a problem. And then 1/3 of my life, of our life, we are asleep. 1/3 of the life we are forced to do something which we are not particularly fulfilling. That pretty much leaves us very little time to be truly. I mean, people speak about, oh, I want to enjoy life. And when are we going to enjoy? Because most of our life is just getting either in sleep or in doing something that's not really something enjoyable. And that's a problem. And so that kind of alienation of the ego from the products of one's work is a major problem. And that alienation can sometimes then take the form of contingent hatred. And then you can see that that hatred then can get projected to certain groups, certain institutions. Right now, for instance, there is so much. I'm sure the problem is not as simple as simply alienation, but it's a big factor in it. For instance, about the immigrants and jobs that we are currently reading about. Again, the problem is complex, but a major factor in that is this inner unhappiness, inner dissatisfaction with the work that we do. And that kind of a hatred that's building up within, which is often subtle, then gets projected outside, and then just to a certain class of people or certain sections, and it can take any number of forms. So that's what this hatred can do. And what Narada is pointing out here is, when this higher love for God fills a devotee's heart, all these different forms of alienation are eliminated. And then that is why such a person then does not hate anything. Because as long as there is inner fractures, inner divisions, this inner dissatisfaction will somehow create hatred. It begins in a very subtle way. Oftentimes we ourselves are not aware of it. But then it kind of builds up, and then boom, it just then it becomes very visible. And so that's a problem. But the solution to that problem is we have to look deep inside about that. Next is na dveshti na ramate. Na ramate means does not enjoy anything else. We saw earlier that that happiness and sorrow are results of karma, sukha and dukkha. But grief is different from sorrow or unhappiness. And similarly, this moha, the word that is moha, that is just kind of getting how would you translate moha? Confusion is a better word. Good. Yeah. Sometimes it get translated delusion, but I think confusion is a better way to describe it. So we, even when there is happiness, we mistake the source of that happiness forgetting that the happiness really comes from within. And if we mistakenly see that happiness is coming from something outside of myself, then that is moha. So there is a confusion about the source. And does not enjoy anything else here means the devotee, the one whose heart is filled with love, recognizes that the apparent joy that seems to come from the material entities outside is not really a joy, because it entraps the devotee. It entraps one who is seeking the infinite into the finite objects of the world, and then through attachment, and then produces a lot of sorrow afterwards. So they say there are things which are unpleasant in the beginning, can produce a lot of joy later. And then there are things which are pleasant in the beginning and can produce a lot of sorrow later. And when we were young, we recognize, of course, when we want to go out and have fun or watch, sit and watch television or play games, and our teachers and our parents say, no, you must sit down and study. I'm going to, no TV for you. And that was not very pleasant. I mean, it was very, it was not very happy. But at the same time, however painful that might have been, if we abide by that and really spend the time doing what we should be doing, later on, the fruits of that a person is able to get. And then through success in various ways, this person will become happy later. On the other hand, if I want instant happiness and then spend time doing what I should not be doing at that point, then I might neglect to do the things I should be doing. So what would be pleasant in the beginning will produce a very long-term unpleasant effects. And so we just have to look at the short-term benefits and long-term benefits. So a short-term hardship and a long-term joy would be preferred to a short-term joy and a long-term hardship. But in order for us to do that, we need to be able to think ahead of time, have some kind of a foresight or a farsight. Now that is what one who has had this love for God has. So this a person doesn't get confused, doesn't get lose oneself in the enjoyment of things which will produce sorrow later on. The second thing that the devotee knows is that satisfying a desire does not end the desire. And that's one key rule every spiritual seeker will have to learn. Sometimes we think, oh, this is something I want to do. Let me just do it and then it's done. Very often it just doesn't happen that way. If I wanted to do something and if it's I find it extremely painful, the chances are probably I may not want to do it again. But if I say, oh, I have this great desire to have ice cream, although the doctor said I should not have it, it's just one. And then I have it. And of course, if I enjoy it, then I'm going to want to have one more. It just never ends. So they say, there is a saying in Bhagavatam, in fact, there is a story, but I won't go into the story now. But the moral of that story is that satisfying a desire will never end the desire. It only accentuates the desire. It only increases the desire, because it's like putting fuel into fire. And that's what the devotee of God knows. So that is one other reason the devotee doesn't lose oneself into the transient pleasures, material pleasures. And finally, and this is important, when we experience that deep inner love for God, that itself is so fulfilling an experience, so joyful an experience, that nothing else can come anywhere close to it. And so, no other joy that anything else in the world can give me can come anywhere close to this inner joy that I'm already experiencing. And therefore, such a devotee will not even lose sleep over it. Think about it this way. When you do some good work, and let's say that good work does not get recognized, nobody is appreciating it, and then sometimes people become bitter. It's like, well, I did so much, and there's no gratitude from anyone, no appreciation from anyone. It's kind of sad. I mean, of course, it would be great if the work is appreciated. I'm not saying it shouldn't be. But if I do something good, and if it's not appreciated, or if it's not, no one notices it, I don't get praise for it, and I feel sad about it, what it means is this: didn't doing that good work itself bring me some joy? And if I did that work and it has brought me such satisfaction, true satisfaction, then no amount of praise, no amount of this thing is going to add anything to it. The work done as a spirit of karma yoga brings such inner joy that a karma yogi doesn't care if somebody comes and says thank you or not, or if someone appreciates it or not. Just the joy of doing the right thing overshadows everything else. On the other hand, if we have done any work with the expectation that it'll get some recognition, it'll get some appreciation, and of course if we don't get it, then that work has brought us more pain than any joy. So that's what is the case in the life of a devotee. One who truly loves God does everything out of love for God. That love so much fills the heart of the devotee that no other external praise or recognition are necessary. Now, just because you don't seek it doesn't mean they won't come. Oftentimes they will. But if they don't come, the devotee will not be affected by it. And that's what I meant by saying it does not enjoy anything else. If it comes, that's good. If it doesn't come, no worries. That's the idea. And finally, notsahi bhavati, doesn't feel encouraged to do anything else. Now, this needs a little bit of clarification. This doesn't mean the devotee of God just kind of sits, not wanting to do anything. So that's not the sense. The idea is this. I mentioned to you last time that when a desire springs in the heart, we do not have enough control over the desires yet. It's not really possible, because desires spring from the mental impressions within our mind. And the impressions are there, and the impressions are going to emit the desire. So there is nothing you can do about it. What we can do about it is, where we do have control, is whether to say yes or no to a desire. That's what willpower means. The willpower, if it is within our control, then a desire springs in the heart. My willpower then gets to decide whether I should catch hold of the desire and act upon it, or leave it and not act upon it. That freedom we all have. When it is said here, the devotee doesn't feel encouraged to do anything else, here it means that the devotee does not take any initiative on one's own to do something. Like, there is no ego-propelled action that I want to do this. Because when I say I want to do this, then there is this I involved. But one who loves God, who has become fully convinced, not merely intellectually, but through one's deepest experience, that everything happens through God's will, then such a person sees himself or herself as merely as an instrument in the hand of God. And if you are an instrument, then an instrument doesn't have any will of its own. If an instrument begins to have a will of its own, you are in deep trouble. Let's say the car you drive is an instrument. You want to turn left. The car wants to turn right. Problem, there's going to be a problem. So the car should not have a will of its own. The car's will should be your will. Then you are safe. Similarly, the body, mind, everything. If I feel they are my instruments, which is better than seeing that they are me, but for a devotee, the devotee sees that the devotee's I has gone completely merged into the divine I. So the devotee sees not that the body and mind are my instruments, but that I myself am God's instrument. And therefore, the meaning of does not feel encouraged to do anything else means the devotee does not undertake any intentional activity which is propelled by one's own ego. The devotee tries to make an effort to see that everything that he or she does is only acting upon the will of God. That's the practice. And the one who has actually experienced that love will just do everything without propelled by one's own ego. So that's this yat prapya na kinchit vanchati, na shochati, na dveshti, na ramate, notsahi bhavati. Let's go to the next one. Sutra 6 on page 49. Yad jnatva matto bhavati, stabdho bhavati, atma ramo bhavati. After knowing which, the devotee becomes like an intoxicated person, becomes free from all activities like an inert object, and finds all joy in his own self. First of all, look at the verb that is used, after knowing which. Remember the earlier, this thing we saw, yat prapya, after obtaining which seemed a little bit like a passive activity. Here, knowing which, the word knowing is used consciously to affirm that bhakti, devotion, is not just a kind of a feeling or emotion. It's a kind of knowledge. So there are many philosophers who have written about love for God. Have said they see love as a kind of knowledge. What happens once this love of God is known, or it just fills the heart of the devotee becomes like an intoxicated person. Matta. The word intoxicated shows that the love for God is more than merely a kind of a pleasant feeling. We know that when there is love in the heart, we feel happy. It's a very pleasant sensation. But the love for God it's a different league altogether. It's like minor league and major league. Love for God is a very different category. It's not just a kind of a good feeling in the heart. It's something that best can be described as intoxication. And that's what is meant by saying such a person becomes intoxicated. By intoxicated, what does an intoxicated person do? Oftentimes when we say someone is intoxicated, that person becomes, to that person, things don't look the way it looks to someone else who is not intoxicated. To such a person, this person is in his or her own world. I mean, the kind of intoxication that we know when people have had a lot of drink, more drink than they could handle, then they kind of become intoxicated. So we see that they are in their own world. Everything else becomes irrelevant to them. Now, that kind of intoxication occurs into one whose heart is filled with love. So, the way the rest of us look at the world and the way the rest of us respond to things of the world, a devotee of God, those things will become, a devotee will look at them, if at all, would see them in a very different light. A devotee of God will be so immersed in one's own world that everything else becomes irrelevant. And that's why sometimes we see, just like people who are intoxicated seem to be doing things which might look weird to people who are not intoxicated. So similarly, a lot of these devotees of God, there are times, it's not as if they are intoxicated every minute of the day, but there are times when you find that sometimes through music or through study or they are meditating or they are chanting, that whole love of God can fill their whole being to such an extent that the others are not able to understand what's going on. And sometimes, therefore, some of these great lovers of God have been seen as people who are crazy because others couldn't understand what was going on. Sri Ramakrishna himself, sometimes people refer to him as that crazy priest in Dakshineshwar because, again, a lot of people couldn't understand. You can't really blame people who saw it that way because they just didn't understand. Why is this person doing things which don't look normal? The word normal is very interesting. Normal, generally, the way we use the word normal is whatever the majority does, well, that's the normal thing to do. And if someone does something very different from others, well, that's not normal. Not normal doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. Not normal doesn't necessarily mean from the perspective of the majority, these exceptions look to be crazy. I mean, think about it this way. One who is intoxicated with the thought and in the reality of the divine, is that person crazy or the rest of us are crazy? So the majority is not always right. At least in spiritual life, we can see that just because majority of people think one way or do it in one way, that doesn't by itself make it right. Becomes free from all activities like an inert object, stabdho bhavati. In other words, there are times in the life of one whose heart is filled with God's love when this person would become completely lose perception of the external world. Sometimes the word that gets used is called bhava samadhi. It's an absorption into that complete experience of God. And so we see that sometimes in the life of Ramakrishna. We see that there are moments when he would lose all outer consciousness. And oftentimes we see that his face was so lit up with kind of a divine smile. There was something he was experiencing and seeing, and all that the others could see was, well, this person is now completely has lost external consciousness. There was one person, I forget his name, in his reminiscences he writes that he was once taken in Calcutta. There's his friend of his had said, "You come, there is a person who goes into samadhi, and I will, you want to see a person in samadhi?" And the person said, "Yes."
And so he took him to a person who was supposed to go into samadhi. And then this friend saw that this person went into supposedly samadhi with kind of an extremely kind of a painful expression. It was very weird, it was very crazy, but it was also very painful. And so this friend said, seeing that, I got terrified of samadhi, like this is something I never want to have. And then after several weeks of this thing, when he came to Dakshineshwar, and then he met Ramakrishna for the first time, and then he saw how filled with joy he was. I mean, he had lost consciousness of the external world, but there was such joy. And he said, finally, that kind of allergy for samadhi that I had acquired, I realized that, well, this is samadhi. If one is immersed in the thought of the blissful divine, then why should one's body language express so much torture or pain within? So this kind of inertness is when kind of a samadhi enters and finds all joy in his own self. Atma Ramo Bhavati, this is very important. All the joy that we seem to experience in life today comes from objects, people, places, things outside of us. And Atma Ramo means finding joy in oneself. The more we are able to find joy in oneself, the less we will depend on the joy that seems to come from outside. And by oneself, I mean one's true self. Physically, we are different. Everyone has that. We all have a body and our bodies are different. We all have a mind and the minds are different. But if we believe that there is something more than just the body and mind within us, there is that spirit, the Atman, then it might seem in the beginning, I have my Atman and you have your Atman and you have your Atman. But that Atman, the spirit, is not different. So if I love my body, love my mind, that's fine. There's nothing wrong in itself, but it's still a very limited love. And there is a real danger that if that love is just directed to only on my own body, only to my own mind, to the exclusion of everything else, then it can create more problem than any benefit. But if I love the true spirit, my true self, not just the ego-centered self, the true self, the spirit, then because that spirit is one, I automatically can love the whole world. We know to love the whole world individually is impossible. Well, I mean, how much of the world are we even in contact with? Well, maybe our family, our friend circle, and clearly, again, all of those people we don't meet every day all the time. But if we truly want to love everyone, we must love the true self within us. Now, just think about this. Think about a little baby, a baby who is few weeks old. That baby, it takes maybe a few days or a few weeks for a baby even to recognize who the father or mother are. The baby, just a baby. It just comes, he just maybe just sees all these sensations. But the beauty is this, everyone loves a baby. The baby doesn't love anyone because the baby doesn't even know anybody, doesn't sometimes know. But everyone loves a baby. And it's not just the baby. Even when children grow up, when we're 2-year, 3-year, 4-year-olds, by that time they kind of know who their mom, who their dad is. And they might say, since we are all saying all the time, I love you, that's fine. And there may be some kind of an attachment, granted. Even then, up to a certain age, children they don't love anybody. parents love their children, or the grandparents love their grandchildren, or uncles and aunties might love their nephews and nieces. That's fine. But the children, they love their toys, they love their games. That's what they do. They might love you if you kind of give them a toy that they like, but they will spend more time with their toy than with you. So they don't love anybody, and everybody loves them. It's only then when we grow older and then we start loving specific things, then along with that love comes a lot of hatred too. Well, I love this, but I hate that, and so on. Now, exactly you can see in the lives of these enlightened beings, those people who love God, they just love God. And because that same divine is in the hearts of all, just by loving God, they are automatically loving everyone. And everyone loves them. You don't find Ramakrishna going and telling everybody how much he loved them. But all of us, not just his contemporaries, now those of us who haven't even seen him physically, have just read about him, we all love him. So that's the key point to recognize here, that if I truly love God, I don't have to love everyone else. Just by the act of loving God, I'm automatically loving everyone. Now that doesn't mean, oh, I love God, so I'm not saying that I love God, I must hate you, or I don't love you. That's not what I'm saying. That I need to focus my energies only on loving the source from which everything has come. And if once that love for God fills my heart, everyone will love me, and my love will automatically go to everyone. Because my heart has already become free from hatred. I don't depend on any material, perishable pleasures of this world. There is no hatred in my heart. I don't expect anything from anyone. And my all in all is given to that source of everything. To such a person, then, everyone loves, and this person loves everyone. That's why the ideal put forward in the Gita and the Upanishads and all of these is love the true self, love God. They are not two different things. And that's what is meant by saying, finds all joy in his own self. It's a S with it's a capitalized S. A lower self would be one's own ego. So that's the difference between being self-centered, the small s, and that often kind of produces things like being selfish, being narcissistic, and that's very problematic. But if we can go beyond the ego and love that true spirit, love God, then we can say we are on the path that is taught in the Bhakti Yoga. So we stop here. You have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions? Yeah.
Swamiji, I wanted to share one comment and then one question. So I read this Bible verse that I thought fits quite well to highlight what you're describing. It says, first be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift to God. If a man say, I love God, and hateth his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he hath seen, how can he love God whom he hath not seen?
Very good.
It said that the measure of how much one loves God is equal to how much that person feels towards their worst enemy.
Sure. So very good, very good. That's
example.
Very true.
So, Swamiji, the question I have is about self-love. One of my personal challenges in self-love is, or at least in the path of Vedanta, is sometimes I tend to neglect the body. You know, not exercising, not eating well. And something that I've been working with is the idea that while there is this S, the capital S self, that S, capital S self, also includes the body. In other words, not that I am not the body, but I am not just the body. And there's a difference there with the body. And so my question is, this self, capital S, self, includes the small body and mind as well, right? So to that extent, how does self-love encapsulate, the need to look after one's body and mind?
One is free to see how body and mind fit into the idea of self. While it's possible to, one way of seeing that it includes it, another way of saying that would be that, can I see that a body and mind are necessary, are important in order for me to know that higher self or God? Because body and mind are the only instruments we have. I mean, what else do we have? Other than that, that's the only thing we have. So, just as I need to take good care of my car, my computer, I'm being fully aware that they are not me. But I know that if my computer is messed up, how much I'm going to be affected, how much my car is needed. So similarly, in my life's journey, a body and mind are as perhaps even more crucial than a computer or a car. And so I need to take care of it. So that could be another way of looking at one's own body and mind. Yes, so that's essentially what I feel. Philosophically, there is a problem to look upon the body as a part of the self, because philosophically, the self does not have any parts. The moment anything has parts, it becomes divisible, it becomes mortal, then it is destructible. And so by definition, self is non-divisible, and therefore we cannot speak of body being included. What we can say is that what appears to me as body and mind now are really nothing but the self, but they appear to me as body and mind, and in particular my body and my mind is because of that layer of ignorance over me. It's like we don't say that the snake is included in the rope, a rope which is mistaken for a snake. So we don't normally say a snake is included in a rope, because that would mean that somehow snake has some kind of a presence. But what we say is what appears as the snake is in reality nothing but the rope. So in the same way, what we can say is presently there is nothing but God everywhere. But presently, because of this layer of ignorance over me, that one infinite being seems to have gotten divided into trillions and gazillions objects, living and non-living. Furthermore, that ignorance has gotten accentuated that one of those objects in the world I am begun to see as me, and then I begin to see this body and mind as mine. In reality, not just this is included in the self, in reality, everything is really nothing but the self. So there is no right or wrong way to look at it, but these are the different ways which should prevent us from neglecting care of one's own body and mind. In fact, it's a very genuine problem that especially even spiritual seekers, since we are seeking spirit, there is always the tendency, at least in some people, to say, I'm not going to pay attention to the body and mind because I'm seeking spirit. And it's understandable why one would do that. Now, at some point, there has to be a kind of a balance in some ways. Because if I totally ignore care of my body and mind, then they are going to fall into disrepair or need repair, And if I keep on neglecting them, then I won't be able to strive my quest for the spirit, because both the instruments have become totally useless. On the other extreme, if I now pour in all my time and energy into taking care of the body and mind, they'll have very little time and energy left to take care of the spirit, which is what my goal is. So every one of us has to kind of figure out to bestow enough time and energy to take care of these instruments which are helpful to me in the goal that I have set before myself. And so we have to kind of navigate this kind of a budgeting of one's time and energy, of how much should I give for this and how much we should give for that. So that's how I see it as the issue.
So, Swamiji, I think what I'm hearing you say
I think we'll have another one.
Okay.
So we'll carry this. Yeah. Yeah.
Swamiji, what you're saying, that it reminds me, you always said that Buddha has that path, extreme, and then he chose the middle path, and he showed us that how to, so middle path is, for spiritual seeker, is the right path.
Right. Yeah, good. That's a good point. Yeah, the Buddha said a violin, for instance, the strings of the violin, if they are too loose, again, the sound won't come. If they are too tight, it'll just break and snap. So you just need the right kind of tension. Similarly, we'll have to find that kind of a right kind of balance between doing the things that need to be done and doing the things that absolutely needs to be done. So both need to be done. See, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. He's gone.
Swamiji, a bit of a technical question about, love of others. When we experience love of God, intuitively, and I think we can feel it, that it makes us love people more. But from the point of view of Vedanta, I have a bit of a difficulty, because, Brahman, everything is Brahman. This light bulb is Brahman. But loving God does not necessarily make me love this particular light bulb. It seems that, it's love, but it's not love of persons. To the point that Krishna, when Krishna instructs Arjuna in the Gita, I mean, it seems that it's possible to feel this love, but also kill these people because that's your dharma. So I wonder if you could...
Yeah, okay, good question. About Gita, I don't think that the Gita analogy works here, because if Krishna saw that Arjuna was fit for that highest love, he would have become intoxicated and inert. He wouldn't have been able to fight. So, but that didn't happen. So clearly he had not reached that stage. And if he had not reached that stage, then the best thing he can do is to do his duty in the spirit of Karma Yoga, purify his heart, and then attain that love. So it wasn't as if that he was seeing that love and still was going and fighting and killing. The earlier point you made was about love for God and the love for this light, for instance. Actually, it's possible to feel love for the light. I mean, what love can we feel for a microscope or a lion? But when Ramakrishna, for instance, Ramakrishna went to a zoo and he saw a lion and he goes into samadhi. So what happens is, once that love for God fills our heart, then automatically, it's very effortlessly, everything that we see somehow gets connected with the glory of the divine. So he sees a lion, he sees, oh, it's the vehicle of Mother Durga, and he goes into samadhi. He goes to the Calcutta Museum in a microscope. He just sees, and then suddenly he says, these kind of tiny microorganisms which cannot be seen through the naked eye, and through this, and he says, how wonderful is this creation of Mother? And then he goes into samadhi again. So I feel that when this love for God dwells in the heart, even the things that might seem like, well, what is there to love in it? But to that person, everything will be filled with love, I think. Yeah. Yeah. Dipesh?
Swamiji, just on the discussions we've had so far, just a comment, and I'd like you to share your views on it. The way I tried to understand, or has been found useful to understand selflessness, love of God and all, is to understand it. No, selflessness is not something inside, but it's an expansion of self, where we expand and include everything that we see. And I, as I pay more attention to that idea, it becomes easy to digest that I don't love my left hand more than my right hand. And if I start accepting the fact that somebody else is part of myself, or the light bulb is part of myself because it's sharing energy that I'm absorbing right now, and we one, then it becomes much easier to understand the idea and build a love for it.
Sure. In fact, Girish Chandra Ghosh, a great disciple of Ramakrishna, he once made a comment. He was speaking about two of Ramakrishna's disciples, Swami Vivekananda, and there was another one disciple called Nag Mahashay. And so what this Girish Chandra Ghosh said, this Maya's net in which everyone is caught. He said these two people were able to break through that net in two radically, apparently different ways. He says Vivekananda, because he saw that self filling the whole universe, so that net couldn't catch him. He just kind of broke through it because his self had expanded to this entire existence itself. And he said, Nag Mahashay, such a great devotee, and this total surrender, this absolutely total surrender to the divine. His ego had vanished completely to the point that he could just get out of that net because the net couldn't hold him. So he made himself so small that he could become free, and Vivekananda made himself so big. So this might seem to be radically opposite ways of doing it, but the principle is the same, that how either I remove that little false, unripe self, or I just hold on to that ripe, true, divine self. That's two different ways of expressing it, but actually the principle is really one and the same. Yeah, that's it. In fact, one of the ways the Buddha's teaching gets interpreted, and that's oftentimes there is a whole thing about Buddha said no self, and Vedanta speaks about the self. And one of the ways that this gets expressed is, when Buddha said no self, which self was he denying? For most people who are not even aware of the Atman, the self is really the sense of I. And this I sense is nothing but the ego. And so when the Buddha said there is no self, he wanted to break this connection we had looking upon the ego as the self. So that was one way of breaking our attachment to the ego. And here is this, like, no, you are the divine self. That's another way of breaking our attachment to the false ego. So both the ways are trying to do the same thing. They apparently seem to be saying mutually opposite thing, but actually the principle is the same.
So Swamiji, related to that example of Swami Vivekananda and Nag Mahasaya, they seem like to be on opposite poles, but is there an intermediate that actually combines the two? Because, not everyone can be a Swami Vivekananda, but on the other hand, not everyone can be fully full of self-surrender. So is there some intermediate path or blending of the two that most of the rest of us could follow?
Well, if you are in the middle, then we are kind of have to remain in the net for a little long. I mean, the essential, we don't know what the dimensions of the net are. We at least have to become small enough to get out of it, or large enough to break it.
I see.
Swamiji, wouldn't we be example of the in between?
Yeah, exactly.
We
I mean,
ourselves right now.
and that's why we are still in the net, right? Yeah. Anything else?
Just want to make the last comment about the body. And actually, we can use our body to learn more about the mind and the inside, and actually train through the body to make mind fit for concentration. And, speaking of the ancient yogic practices, meaning asana and pranayama, that's how you can really learn about yourself deeper and, explore other things. So as I like to say, is that treat your body as a temple. So at the same time, you live in it, but you're not part of it. So you're taking care of it in a way that you would take care of the divine, as we all do in the temple. So that's just...
Sure. I mean, as long as you know, well, let me put it this way. As long as I keep my spiritual aspiration alive, then I won't get caught with the body. Yes, it's fine. I'm not saying neglect the body. Take good care of the body. Always being alert that, because we see this in our own lives sometimes. We have these very high, noble goals and ideals before us. But oftentimes, as we get kind of mixed up with activities in order to fulfill that goal, sometimes we may forget about it. And then it happens. Sometimes just look at our own lives. When we were teenagers, we had many of us had kind of very idealistic way. And then later on, as we grow older, we just have to ask ourselves, how much of the ideals I so much cherished when I was young, I have been able to keep that flame shining brightly in my heart? Or how often would I had to compromise with the goal? Sometimes people forget about it totally. Sometimes their life takes a total detour. All these risks are there. And therefore, even when we are taking good care of the body, as long as I know that my goal is beyond these material entities, I am safe. Because it's fine to say body as a temple of God, but people get attached to temples and forget God.
That's right.
It happens.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, it just reminded me that when I was 6 years old, I told my mom that I want to be a cosmonaut, so it didn't happen.
All right. So we'll continue this discussion when we meet next time. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. On Sunday, we will have Antar Yoga as usual. We'll have reading by members, songs, reflection, and then also a birthday celebration of everyone born in the month of October. So all of you are welcome. Next Wednesday, we will continue with the study of Bhakti Sutra. Tuesday and Saturday, Aarti and meditation will also continue as usual. And next Thursday evening, 6:30 to 9:30, we'll have the Kali Puja, the annual Kali Puja. That will be next Thursday on the 19th. So let's conclude with a prayer now, page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus,
Lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.